Hey there, this is Nick from NAJA Woodworking, and welcome to episode 1 of our Setting Up Shop series. Today we're going to be building something called a miter saw station, and if you look behind me here, you'll see my miter saw is just currently sitting on the floor. Now, if you're just going to be doing 1 or 2 DIY cuts with the miter saw, it's okay to have it up on a shelf somewhere and then bring it down to the floor when you need to make a cut. In fact, it's actually a really good height for Soka when she needs to use it, but for myself, I don't want to have it sitting down on the floor. So the other option you could do is you could put it on a bench top or table or anything like that, and you'll have it on an elevated surface. But then the problem is the surface of the saw itself is a good 2 or 3 inches above the surface of the table. And so if you were to lay a long board across the saw top, it's going to be unsupported on both sides. All right, we got everything we need. We have all our supplies. We got the plans. Let's go ahead and get building. So here's a preview of the plans that I picked for this build, and I'll drop a link in the description down below. I am going to be making some alterations based on my own needs for this project, but otherwise the main inspiration is right here. Now when you go to these plans, you'll notice that it calls for 3 sheets of 3/4 inch ply and 1 sheet of 1/4 inch, and it gives you the cut list right here. A lot of cuts going on, and so that's going to take up the first part of this project. Alright, so here we are starting off on day 1. We have all our supplies, all our wood. For this build, the plywood that I got is all going to be oak plywood. Now, to save a little bit of money, I did go ahead and get my wood from Lowe's instead of a lumberyard. It was just the cheaper option, and since for me this is a hobby and not a full-time career, I need to be able to save some money where I can. But anyway, this is the start, and my plan was to basically just get all the cuts out of the way. And for these cuts, because I don't have my table saw station built or set up yet, I decided to do them all with my circular saw. And in order to ensure that I was getting good, accurate, straight cuts, I bought a new tool for the workshop. You can see right there I was excited to have finished one cut because it took me a little while to figure out how I was going to do this, since I am working in a brand new setup. The new tool that I got is shown right here and shown in the rest of these clips for every cut that I make, and that is the Kreg Straight Edge XL. It's a really useful tool, especially because, like I said, I'm not going to be using my table saw yet, so I use this in order to get nice straight cuts, but there was a little bit of setup involved, and I had to learn how to properly use the tool. I had to calibrate it specifically to the dimensions of my circular saw, but eventually we got that working. And even though the first cut or 2 took me a little bit to get the hang of, eventually I was cutting these things like butter. Now you'll also notice what I'm doing here is I have a sheet of plywood on top of the table, and then what I did is I grabbed a couple of pavers and I put those in between the bottom sheet of plywood and then the top sheet that I'm actually cutting, and that's so that I don't cut through the table or anything like that. And I tried to position the pavers in such a way that when my boards were getting cut through, 1, I obviously wasn't going to cut the pavers, and 2, when the cut was finished, the board wasn't going to drop and give me more tear out than I was already getting. Now right here, this is the end of day 1. It's nighttime now, I'm covered in sawdust, and I'm exhausted, so called it a day there, and then hit the shop early the next morning for day 2. At this point, I was just about done doing all of the cuts from the first sheet, and so I was ready to move on to sheets 2 and 3. The cuts did start to get more intricate. Again, you can reference all the cuts on that cut list from the plans, but for the first sheet of plywood, it was mostly getting things like the shelves, the top, the cabinet sides, nice big pieces of wood. As we worked our way through the sheets, we had to make smaller, more intricate cuts that would make up some of the supporting shelves, the drawer pieces, even though, as you'll see, I ended up deciding not to go with the drawers for this build. But it was mostly just cut after cut after cut. Took me 2 days to get it all done, but we finally got there. Now by that point, we had basically all the lumber we needed cut, except for the 1/4 inch sheet, which I could do later when I actually needed those pieces. I got all my cuts lined up and labeled so that my project build was nice and organized. And like I said, I did end up making some alterations to this project, and that was because I needed to save some money where I could by excluding cabinet doors and drawers so that I didn't have to buy as much hardware. So just keep in mind, if you ever want to help support the channel, I have a Patreon that I'll put right down in the description down below, and you can always help out the channel if you want to keep seeing some cool projects. Now, before we could actually get to the fun part of constructing this thing, I needed to sand all my pieces, at least slightly, just to get them a little more workable. I had a sanding brick here to do the job, and mostly I did learn how to prevent a lot of tear out the more cuts I made, but especially for the first few cuts I had a lot of it, so I just wanted to get all the tear out sanded away. Now we're in a good position to actually start the construction of this project. So the first thing we need to do is drill some pocket holes. We're going to start with what's going to be the bottom of the cabinets, and so right now I'm going to drill 4 pocket holes into the short sides of what are going to be the bottom of my cabinets. And then I'm also going to drill some pocket holes into the tiny strips that I cut that make up the bottom skirts of the cabinet. So like I said, for this piece here, and again, this is all reflected right there in the plans if you choose to use them, those are going to have 4 pocket holes on the short sides, and for the strips, those are going to have 2 pocket holes on each short side of the strip, and then it's going to have about 4 or 5 pocket holes going along one side of the long side of the strip, and that's how we're going to throw together what's going to make up the bottom of the cabinet. Once the pocket holes are all screwed or drilled, then you can go ahead and set some clamps like I did here and just go start using your pocket holes. For this, I used the 1.25 inch pocket holes, and I also learned on this project that not only does the length of the pocket hole screw matter, but also the coarseness that you use. Some are good for hardwoods and some are good for sheets, so make sure you're using the appropriate screws, because at first I wasn't. Now right there we have one bottom finished, and we got to do the same thing to the other one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the bottom that we just finished, and we're going to attach that to what's going to be the outside of the cabinet. So what I did here is I took what's going to be the outside and I laid it down flat on my table. I then grabbed the bottom and I lined it up so that what's going to be the front of the cabinet, the bottom and the side are completely flush, but then in the back there is going to be a slight 1/4 inch offset, and that's where your 1/4 inch plywood can go for the backing. It was hard to clamp this together, so I just kept using the pavers to keep everything nice and square and sturdy. But once we finished, you could see this is what we got. We got the finished one on the left, and then on the right we have the bottom that we're going to need to do the same steps to, except mirrored. Now what we need to do is we need to drill pocket holes into what's going to be the top of the cabinet and also the cabinet divider. So we're going to drill some pocket holes into the short sides of each of those boards. And again, remember, it's really nice because every step that we do, we have to do it again for the other cabinet, but just mirror it because the cabinets are going to be mirrored and symmetrical across the surface. With those pocket holes drilled, we're now ready to attach the top to this thing. So now I'm going to lay what I've done so far down on the table again so that the outside board is flat against the table. I'm then going to take what's going to be the top of the cabinet, and I did cut a divider, which is 2 3/4 inches, and I used that to basically place the top so that it's in the appropriate position when I screw it all together. Now, even though I apparently don't know how to keep a camera very level, I'm going to drill in that divider as well with the pocket holes that I previously drilled. But you'll notice what I'm talking about. If you look at the top of the cabinet, it does not lie perfectly flush with the side. It's actually inlaid a little bit. It's inlaid by 2 3/4 inches. And again, I cut a strip so that I can make sure that was exact when I was putting it together. And you'll see why we did that momentarily. Now again, I'm doing the same thing here. I clamped my support strip to what is going to be the inside of the cabinet, and now I'm just using my pavers to keep everything square and sturdy once more, and I'm going to start attaching the bottom of the cabinet to the inside wall and then the top as well. And so you'll see here, this is exactly what we finish with. So the object that I'm holding is what it'll look like once this step is completed. On the left, you'll notice that I took what's going to be the actual top of the miter saw station, and even though it's not attached yet, I put it on top of the cabinet just so you can see what it'll look like and why we needed that 2 3/4 offset. Now what I need to do, in order to account for the swinging arm of the miter saw, I need to notch out both inner sides of the cabinet, and so I took my jigsaw and I notched out a square. And then I also took what's going to be the very top surface of the miter saw station and I notched out the corner to account again for that swinging miter saw arm, and then I used my jigsaw to clean up any off edges. Now we needed to prep putting the top of the surface on, so I took those 2 3/4 inch support strips and drilled some pocket holes into them. Now we could attach the top, and I'm going to show you that. Wait a second. Who is that weenie? Alright, let's keep going. So anyway, we have our support strips in place. These are just going to help support the top surface of the station, and so I'm going to go ahead and attach those via the pocket hole screws that I drilled earlier. Now comes what is perhaps my favorite part of this project. I used some pavers to secure it, and I placed the top on top of the entire cabinet structure, and I got to attach it using my new DeWalt brad nailer. Now the reason this was my favorite part of the project is, one, it's always fun to get a new tool. I'd also never used a brad nailer before, so that was a lot of fun learning how to. But also, it was a new building practice for me. Normally in the past, I would have just screwed those to the top, and I might have used countersunk screws, but still, this was a new thing to learn for me. And then I went ahead and brad nailed the back 1/4 inch ply onto the cabinet as well. And then, even though I didn't show the best steps here, I used another Craig jig to drill what would be my shelf hole pins. Finally, I cut a few 3-inch squares of excess plywood and I attached them to the bottom of the cabinet, and then I used those to attach the casters so that each of the shelves was completely mobile. So once we repeated all of those steps to get both symmetric sides of this station, we were ready to put in the connecting shelf. So I had a couple support strips, and this was basically a process of trial and error. But what you want to do is you want to measure how high your miter saw table or your miter saw surface plus the thickness of the plywood that you're using is. And then you want to make sure those supporting strips are connected in between your two cabinets at that exact measurement. Then, with your actual miter saw shelf, you can place it, you could test your miter saw out, and basically what you're looking for is that the surface of the miter saw station is completely flush with the rest of the miter saw station. Now, once I had those supports screwed in at the appropriate height, I went ahead and took the shelf that's going to hold the miter saw, and I attached them to those supporting brackets with some more brad nails. Finally, once everything was in place, I took my last sheet of 1/4 inch ply and I brad nailed it to the back so that everything was nice and covered when looking at it from the front. And now we are ready to see a glimpse at the final project. So this is what it's going to look like when all is said and done. Like I said, to save some money and some time, for the time being, I'm not going to include drawers or cabinet doors here. I wanted to keep things relatively simple, but still have the miter saw station completely up and functional, which it is. And so now comes the best part of every woodworker's project, and that is the sanding. So I started off by sanding with 120 grit, then I went over the whole thing again with a 220, threw on the mask this time because I found that as I was sanding the interiors of the cabinets, my head was in there and all the dust was just flying around. Finally, once it was all sanded and nice and smooth, I went ahead and covered the entire thing with shellac as my finish. Since this is just going to be a garage station and nothing fancy, I figured that would do the trick. And then I forgot to film it, but after I shellacked the whole thing and let it dry, I went over everything again one more time with a 220 grit. And now we're finally ready for the final reveal. Everybody, I am very proud of how this project turned out. I learned so much during this build about how to properly use different types of pocket hole screws, how to use new tools, how to prevent tear out. So much learned and so much fun had with this build. Now, before the outro, I want to let you know that during the course of this video, all the music that you heard was made by my great friend Richie. He is a very cool dude and a very talented musician. So in the description down below, I will link any songs and all of the credits to his music. So he was cool enough to let me use it in these videos. So go ahead and show him support if you're digging the music as well. And there you have it. That is the start to the Setting Up Shop series and the completed miter saw station. Alright everyone, the miter saw station is officially up and functional and ready to be used on all of our future projects. Now in the near future there are some upgrades I want to make to this. Namely, I do want to add cabinet doors so that the shelves can be hidden. I need to get a shop vac, which is going to go beneath the station here, and then I'll have to drill a hole through that back panel so that the dust feed can go behind the machine and then up to the back of the miter saw. And then most importantly, I'm going to need to include an extended table saw fence. So the original plans that I used included a wooden fence that was running the length of the station, but I wanted to do my fence a little bit differently, so I altered the plans, and that's why my top here is completely flat. But like I said, in the near future, I want to basically change this so that there's an extended fence running along the whole thing. All right, so leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. Give the video a thumbs up, and then also subscribe and make sure you hit that bell notification so that you can kind of follow along on this entire Setting Up Shop series and never miss a beat on the channel. All right guys, Nick from NAJA Woodworking. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.